All right. Good morning.
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 All right, it's 8:30. Andy, did you already send out the assessment to everyone so they can?
The poll?
Yes.
No, I was gonna, I can do that now if that's what we want to do.
We can do it in just a minute. That would be great. However you want to do it. I'm going to introduce Katie. She's our speaker today. And Katie Mankins joined UC Davis, UC Santa Barbara in 2015 with over 25 years of management and technical experience in various industries. She sees her role as a director of process management in the office of the CIO as an opportunity to solve business problems, craft realistic solutions, and deliver successful outcomes. She is well-versed in the practice that enables projects to deliver promised customer value, and she has rich and deep experience in business process improvement, project, program, and portfolio management. She is a certified black belt, and she is an instructor for the white belt, yellow belt, practice problem solving, and process mapping training at UCSB. We are so happy to have you here, Katie, and we really appreciate you getting up so early, because when I said she's from Santa Barbara, we have the 3-hour time difference, so she is really being a champ. So again, welcome and thank you.
Very much appreciate the opportunity to be here today and provide this introduction to risk management. So can we go ahead and throw up the poll?
I've launched the poll. If you can click and submit your answer, we will see the results live.
Sounds great.
Jessica Hoppy.
You can see the results of the polls in the chat if you're interested in taking a look.
Oh, that's great. I like this tool, Andy. Nice job.
So since I'm screen sharing, I'm not seeing the chat at the moment. So what are we seeing, Jane?
So I've heard of it is 30%. I'm familiar with the basics, 30%. I've used it occasionally, 39%. Okay. And I consider myself an expert is 4%.
Okay, so we've got a blend, just as we were thinking we might have. So my hope is that people with different levels of experience will get something out of this material, because I've tried to design it such that it could be an absolute introduction, but also have some nuggets that would be useful and valuable to people who have some experience. So let's go ahead and get into our slides. And thanks for the poll. That's wonderful. So, there we go. So I'd like to start with some fundamental concepts about risk management and definitions that can help us with applying risk management practices to process improvement efforts. So let's start with something basic. We need to manage risk in order to increase the likelihood of project success. So When you're managing a project, whether it be a process improvement effort or a larger scale business transformation, managing projects involves a great deal of uncertainty, and we make use of project management practices such as risk management to create a shared understanding of what it will take to have a successful project. So the dictionary, like Webster, defines risk as the chance of injury, damage, or loss. But in the project management context, we can see slightly different definitions of risk depending on the source. I've included two versions from PMBOK here, one from the 5th edition and another from the 7th edition, which has changed the structure so that it's based on organized around practices instead of processes. So, and we've also got a definition from Prince 2 and APM, which is the Association for Project Management. You can see some similarities here in these definitions, but I'd like to propose a working definition, this one here. So a risk is the chance that a project will fail to meet one or more of its success targets and the impact if it does. If a risk occurs, then it becomes an issue. So I found that we really can't talk about risks and risk management without also talking about issues. And it's interesting since issue management is really a basic part of project management, and it's pretty straightforward. And experienced project managers deal with issues day in, day out. But the PMBOK mentions issues in passing in its discussion of risk, but PMBOK does not have an issue management process. So project managers have different concepts of what an issue is and therefore what issue management is. So got some definitions here. Again, I didn't find the text in the 7th edition, but I've got the 5th edition and 6th edition of PMBOK here, along with corresponding Prince 2 and the Association for Project Management. So again, I'd like to have a working definition that we can use in our discussion today. So we're going to say an issue is a matter that requires a decision or agreement from multiple people in order to keep it from affecting the course of a project. So issue, not the same thing as a risk. A risk is an uncertain condition or event. And once if the risk does happen, then it's an issue. Here are some other useful definitions that may come into play when we're talking about risk management that I thought it would be useful to share. And each of them has some interaction with them and risks or issues. So for example, questions, if we have unanswered questions, those might become issues, or action items that don't get completed may also cause issues. Assumptions can be a source of risk. So we should revisit them periodically to make sure they're still valid. And constraints, some kind of limiting factor that affects the execution of a project. So you have to take your constraints into consideration when you're managing risks, particularly when we talk about risk responses. So these definitions may also come in handy. So, to ensure that a project is successful, we have to manage risk, and we can't simply hope that no problems will occur. So how can we do that? Well, I would like to recommend an approach to risk management that comprises 5 activities. 1, we define measures of success, and that is means that we're going to specify what success looks like from the customer's perspective. 2, we're going to identify risks and recognize how the project could fail to meet the success criteria or success targets. 3, we're going to analyze risks so we can decide which risks to focus on. We're going to mitigate risks and decide what actions to take in order to stay on target. And then we need to monitor and report risks. And so we're providing visibility into the results of our risk management. And we're going to talk about each of those in turn. So when project risks really exist in all phases of a project. So if we're talking about process improvement efforts, this would mean all phases of DMAIC, we may run into risk. But the greatest opportunity for risk management is in the define phase and also in the improve phase. So if we're going to get things off on the right foot to manage risk on the project, we need to know what targets the project is expected to achieve. So we can ask ourselves, who are our primary customers and stakeholders, and how would they define success? Or in other words, what does a successful result or project look like to them? And I would propose that we can capture the results of this process, this thought process, in what we call a success model. And basically, with a success model, we're going to take each of the customers or customer groups and brainstorm around what success looks like for that customer or group. And we can include it in around a central theme of what is success, as shown here. And one of the interesting aspects of doing this kind of exercise is we can identify similarities and differences between the definitions of success for each of our customers. And this can be really important if you happen upon conflicting definitions of success, because if you have those, that in and of itself is a source of risk, or maybe a source of risk. If you have people who have different notions of what success looks like, you're going to have to take some action to resolve those, or make sure that you don't run into surprises later. So I think if we do this success model up front, then we get a collective understanding of what success is going to look like, and then we can move into identifying risks. And one of the things that we want to do is kind of turn that success model upside down. So after we think about what success looks like from all those different perspectives, we're going to turn it upside down and think about, well, what could prevent that from happening? So risks are coming from different kinds of threats, which may be external or internal. And if they're internal, they're influenced by our own decisions and actions at this stage of the project. And internal versus external threats to the project, we have more control over the internal actions because we've got that control over our own decisions and our own actions. So if we look at things from different perspectives, we can identify all the possible sources of risk, and then we are going to write some risk statements. So an effective risk statement is going to describe what can prevent our project from achieving its targets. So when we state risks properly, the risk can be defined with enough precision to allow us to set priorities and take useful actions to mitigate critical risks. So this is kind of a primer for writing a good risk statement. And you can remember the if, then, and so. So if is the conditions that need to be present for the risk to occur. And we have an example. And then the then part is what will happen if the conditions are present. And then the so is, if the risk does occur, what does this mean for us and our objectives? So the if is providing context about the risk, and the then is describing the possible future event, and so is comes around the impact. So anticipated effects on the project's ability to achieve its success targets. So if we use this format, then we've got a pretty good risk statement to work with and do the next step in our process. Any questions so far? So we're going to use this, we're going to be writing risk statements based on the risks that we uncover by doing our brainstorming around what could prevent us from achieving success. And then we can use kind of this little checklist or litmus test to go through and have another look at our risk statements to make sure that they're good. And a vague or ineffective or incomplete risk statement is not really that helpful in managing a risk. So cat across keyboard, excuse me. So we want to make sure that our risk statements are well crafted so that they will be the most useful in managing the risks going forward with our effort. Because the next thing we're going to be doing is we are going to be creating a risk register, and we'll take the risks that we've come up with and put them into a relatively simple tool. These can, I've got an example here of the kinds of data elements you would have in a risk register, but basically you want to use this template to capture the risks that you have identified, and then have a place to keep the information about your risks so that you can take other actions, such as analyzing risks. So it might be easy to come up with a long list of what can cause us to fail to meet a target, but our challenge is we want to have a relatively tight, concise list. And so we're going to do that by analyzing the risks we've identified in order to decide which ones are the most important. So basically, which ones we're going to focus on. And we're going to be doing this as qualitative risk analysis. So a risk has two essential attributes: probability and impact. Probability is the likelihood that a threat will cause us to fail to meet a target, and impact is the consequence of failing to meet that target. So we can use a prioritization matrix, as we're going to look at in the next slide, to help us focus on the most important risks in the project. So here's how we might do that. We're going to take each of the risks we've identified and rate the probability of it occurring using a scale of, say, 1 to 5. If you can also use a smaller matrix, like a 3 by 3 matrix instead of a 5 by 5, but I've shown an example here of a 5 by 5. So probability first of it happening. So 5 being almost certain, 1 being rare. And then you also will rate the impact of your identified risks using the same scale. So impact going from 1, not significant, to 5 being severe. And then you're going to calculate a risk score by multiplying the probability times the impact. And then you would sort your risks into this matrix using the risk score as your primary sort. And then one of the things you can do with a matrix such as this is you can decide which risks you're going to tackle first based on your risk tolerance in your organization. So if your organization is fairly risk averse, You might want to consider having risk responses for all the risks so that you got all your bases covered and you know exactly what you're going to do in different situations. If your organization is not risk averse, you might only want to do the, you know, the reds and the oranges here on this list. But a risk matrix is a really great way to prioritize the risks and decide which ones to take action on versus which ones we can, you know, take a different kind of response. So the more planning you do, the more likely you'll have at least thought about different kinds of scenarios and how you might respond. So PMBOK defines risk response as the process for developing options and actions to reduce threats to project success. And risk responses fall into 4 different categories. So we can avoid the risk. So basically, when we avoid the risk, we're eliminating the threat by eliminating the root cause of it. So you could do that by like reducing scope. For example, that's one way to avoid it. Just simply cut that out of the project and not have to deal with it. We can transfer the risk to someone else. So this might work in scenarios where you're working with, say, a vendor or someone external to your organization. So you can make someone else responsible for the risk by purchasing insurance or maybe outsourcing work. So if you're going to do this, you're going to want to include that in any kind of contract you're working with. You can mitigate the risk, and that's one of the most common options is to reduce either the probability or the impact of the risk. So you can do one or the other or both. You can reduce the probability of the risk occurring or address the impact if it does occur. And any kind of reduction there of the probability or impact is typically what people are doing when they're developing risk responses. And the last option is risk acceptance. So if we're going to say, okay, we'll accept this risk if it happens.
Excuse me.
We'll have a plan just in case it does. But if you're doing risk acceptance, then if that risk does happen, you're going to have to make sure you have a way of communicating to your stakeholders for the project of what this means if it does happen. So typically your risk acceptance tactic is used in situations where the impact and the probability are both pretty low. So there's no damaging impact to the project, but mostly the risk responses that we're going to develop are going to be risk mitigation. So even if you've done everything up to this point, and you've done everything recommended for risk management, problems may still put the project at risk. And so your monitoring and your reporting of the risks in your risk register should include 5 different elements. And so you're going to be reporting on the risk, i.e. the threat that is putting the success of the project at risk. And you're going to be reporting on which targets or dependencies are at risk and the current estimate of the results of that. You're going to be reporting on mitigation steps, how you're planning to stay on target, and what the current status is, your situation, and how well your mitigation is working. And then you can use the stoplight model shown here to give a quick synopsis of the situation. And this is pretty handy if you use this stoplight risk technique. You can say that, you know, if everything's green, then the risk is unlikely to threaten the success of the project. Mitigation plan has been successful so far, and you may even want to drop off that particular risk after you've reported it once. And because, you know, the saying is green is good, but if you have yellow, then it's a potential threat if not addressed soon. There's a good mitigation plan in place, but it's not yet been successful. And red is it's a current serious threat, and we don't have a feasible plan in place, or the plan that we had in place has failed. So we need to keep risks in front of the stakeholders and the project team so that everyone knows how successful we are at trying to prevent problems from happening and making sure that we reduce the probability or the impact of these potential risks to project success. So risk management starts early in the life of a project. It starts for process improvement efforts. It would start during define, and you would continuously revisit it throughout the life of the project. And risk management's not standalone, but we can integrate it with many other project management practices. So here's an example of how this might play out. So risk management, we may have unresolved issues creating additional risk to our project. And if a risk occurs, it creates an issue, hence the interaction with issue management. Any delays in resolving issues may impact the schedule because people are busy resolving issues rather than doing the planned work. And also resolution of issues may lead to some scope changes, something that was, again, another source of unplanned work, which in itself is leading to risk. So these interactions between how you're dealing with issues and risks does have a bearing on your ability of the team to carry out the scheduled work as planned. So we have to be on the lookout for how much time we're sinking into avoiding risk. Now, there's another tool that in our Lean toolkit that you may be familiar with, and we can use this to identify and quantify risk at another stage of the project. And I wanted to include this here because once we've gone through the analyze phase and we've identified some proposed countermeasures and some potential solutions, we can use the information to assess and determine some acceptable levels of risk and or the potential risk reduction effect of our proposed improvements. So one of the key benefits of using failure modes and effects analysis, or FMEA, is that it forces you to think about all the potential failure modes in a system, not just the most likely or the most severe ones. So that would allow you to develop a comprehensive mitigation strategy that accounts for all risks in the solution, no matter how small. So what we need to get started is we need our key process input variables and our list of proposed solutions and a revised process map. And then we can look at all of the different ways that these inputs could fail and what the effect would be to the customer. And then decide based on the occurrence, how frequently that failure might happen, the severity if it does, and the ability of our controls to detect the failure. We can assign a risk priority number that we can use to then rank these potential failures and decide in what order we're going to deal with them. So this is something, as I mentioned, that we do later, but it complements the broader look at success from the view of the customer that we did back in the define phase, and then takes a more granular look at the solutions we've come up with, and we can use the FMEA to inform our choices of which solution to go with and what controls we might need to put in place to make sure that that solution is working as desired. So it's a nice complement to earlier risk identification and analysis. And this may be something that you all are using already, but I wanted to join it up with the earlier success model and staying on target with the, okay, now we know what we're doing. We've reduced a lot of uncertainty in our project. And this is another way of starting to tunnel in, looking for risk areas and try to prevent failures that affect customer success using our new and improved solution. For reference, I also wanted to include some common sources of risk for process improvement efforts. So I'm sure some of you have seen these. I know that when we are doing Greenbelt projects, one of the key learnings experiences for someone going through the Greenbelt training and project selection is scoping too large, trying to boil the ocean. That's a hard lesson learned for many of our Greenbelt candidates. And if we don't have voice of the customer data readily available, that's going to take some work to get that where we need it to be. And that also reflects on the making sure we understand what success looks like in the eyes of our customer. Many processes don't have data readily available, so you're constructing that from scratch. So that could be a source of risk, the unplanned effort to get that data. Resource constraints and resource capacity is always an area of risk. So you may have team members that you need their knowledge, but they're working on other efforts, whether it's operations or working on other projects. If we need to make some kind of capital investment that we didn't plan for, or we realize that we're going to have to do that and we didn't account for that in our original project planning, that's going to be risk. Extensive tooling being required, or not realizing that there could be significant IT support required is another potential area of risk that might go unnoticed early on in the project. Is, the root of all risk management really is uncertainty. And of course, at the onset of a project, we don't know yet what we don't know. So we sometimes need to get extremely creative when it comes to figuring out what risks are present. And if we do that based on what could prevent us from achieving success, then maybe we can avoid some of these pitfalls and common sources of risk in the project. So the approach to risk management that we've talked about this morning can transform a project manager's worry list into actionable tasks that you can plan and assign and manage. And if we start with an explicit definition of success and having what our success targets are is an essential part of successful risk management, because it provides a framework for analyzing and evaluating risks and defines a strategy for mitigating those risks by reducing uncertainty, generating viable options, sometimes adjusting targets and addressing threats directly through risk mitigation. So if we can start by visualizing what a perfect project looks like, then we can try to take proactive steps to achieve success, but keeping in mind that there are no perfect projects. So because there are no perfect projects, we need to have risk management to prevent crises and increase the likelihood of success by recognizing and acting upon threats to project success. So I'd like to ask you right now, do you have any questions? And what's your experience been with managing risks and issues on process improvement efforts? Are there any insights that you'd like to share or questions you have about what we've talked about so far? Let's throw it open. Jane, Andy, do we have any questions in chat?
It looks
I see
like
Dana's
Dana has their hand up.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation, Katie. Enjoyed it. I have, as far as in lean projects, I have to say we didn't have very rigorous risk management, but kind of more in larger waterfall type projects.
Mhm.
Had a very dedicated project manager and developed a risk register. But one of my questions is, if you have groups doing lean projects, how would you apply a lot of the ideas you talk about? How could that be applied?
Well, my thought was that success model being used up front could inform a lot of the brainstorming around risks. And I thought that with the idea of if we think about voice of the customer and then explicitly develop that success model, then we can use the success model as a source of risk identification to say, okay, what can we do to prevent how could we prevent success from happening? What are those risks? And then use those to narrow the focus for the risk management effort in the project. I was also thinking that as we go, that would be done in define. But when we're collecting data and quantifying the problem in measure, that is when we would start to whittle down that list, because that list may be initially large. And then during the analyze phase, that's where we could do the impact of probability scoring, so that we can target some specific risks to factor into our analysis of what the best potential solutions might be once we get to the stage where we're in improve. We could use the risk as one of the criteria for selecting amongst the potential solutions and countermeasures, and then apply FMEA to the solution or solutions we've selected to make sure that those are robust and are actually not increasing risk. We actually pick things that are reducing our risk and getting a better chance of success for the customers. So you go back to that, revisit what does success look like, make sure we're still on track, and then build any necessary controls into the control phase that you discovered by going through the FMEA exercise. I agree that this kind of risk management, the typical risk management, is more associated with waterfall type projects. But I think you can use some of the techniques applied in the right places to inform your choices throughout a process improvement effort. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yeah, I think, yeah, I mean, I think you can really apply the same techniques to agile projects.
Mhm.
It's just not, yeah. I think
Yeah,
that
I didn't
depends.
want to get into like quantifying the quantitative risk analysis, because I think that goes to a level of formality that probably isn't needed in this kind of effort.
Mm-hmm.
But certainly the value of doing the qualitative probability and impact gives you a way to make your narrow the focus of the risks and choose which ones you're going to spend some time on and which ones you can say, okay, we don't need to really worry about that one right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it could be, I don't know, with Agile, you kind of create a backlog of stories. I mean, be kind of tied into like, you could throw these out that have too much risk.
Yeah, actually, I was thinking with this, that kind of rule of thumb for if, then, so is kind of like thinking about how you structure a good user story.
Right. Yeah. Yep. That's true.
Hey, Katie, we had a question asking if there were any templates for risk management available, or if you knew any where any places where that would be a resource that people could find.
Oh, there's a lot of them out there. If you just do a search on, risk register, you'll find lots of examples. I can share the one I did the screenshot of. Basically, risk registers are fairly simple things that you can do in different kinds of tools, whether it's Excel or Smartsheet or Google Sheets. The risk prioritization matrix is also something that you can find examples of with a Google search. I like to, I myself prefer the version of a risk matrix where the red risks are on the upper right instead of a different quarter. I just like them to look that way. But I think they make the most sense when they're organized with the scoring from high to low and on probability and low to high on the other axis for impact.
Sure. It's Becca, if you wanted to unmute and you had your hand up.
Yes, thank you so much, Katie, for your presentation. I'm thinking about how we currently do our process improvement activities, and we're starting to incorporate at the front end. I mean, just we're just doing our first project with an HPT model or human performance model on the front end with some planning, but our actual process improvement events, we do with mapping our current state and also collecting ideas for an ideal and an interim state. But I'm thinking that would it make sense during that time in that current state of also collecting risks that we see, because these risks that you list as common areas, we've run into all of them.
Yeah.
And so we do a little bit of that in scoping, but I'm thinking we should really interject it in a more forceful way, either in the scoping area or through that current state mapping area, so that we know exactly what we have to face in front of us, because they trip us up later. So I really like the idea of interjecting it somewhere within our current process, making it more evident to the team, so that they know exactly where we stand with those risks, and then finding ways to mitigate, or can the project even move forward at the level that we're looking at, or does it need to be revamped or rethought about? What are your thoughts about that?
That's a really good idea. And in particular, I think that by bringing the risks forward into the planning and some of the early stages of the project, you can come up with some more definitive actions that the team could take to plan ahead and say, okay, if we recognize that this might be a possible source of risk or this might happen, what could we do about it? So you're better prepared in case it does. But something else I would also like to include here is that if you've got a list of typical risks or sources of risk, you can add to that over time. So as you encounter different problem areas or risks on a project, you can add it to the list so that the next project benefits from being able to say, oh, let's think through that one as well.
Yeah.
So these risk areas, or you can kind of start with a just like you might you might start with a common list of risks that your organization has run into on different projects, so that you're sharing the knowledge that others have gone through and helping the next project be more successful.
Okay, so you're suggesting actually having that list of risks in front of the team at that planning stage, and these are ones that we've run into before within our college, and let's think about these related to this project. Do we see any of them as possible risks?
Maybe some of them might not apply for a given project, but it's good to think through them and say, okay, we don't need to worry about that one, but you can add to it over time. That's kind of a nice feature. Also, another thing that you can kind of build over time is success targets. You could have a starter set of success targets that you can work from to say, okay, this is what typically we are looking at in terms of our projects, and this is the sort of thing that we're looking at for maybe in your organization you value projects ending on time as scheduled, or maybe your organization values staff retention. Everybody does, of course, but for most higher ed institutions, you're not talking about profit and loss or something. But you could be talking about success in terms of meeting your schedule, how many defects came out, what kind of qualities was in your solution, or retention related things like if you lost people during the project because it was a death march or something. But you can build on the sort of the success targets over time, just like you might build on the common risk areas that you've seen across projects.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah, that would be really helpful, I think, for teams too, besides just pulling together the list of possible common risks that we've seen over projects in time, and then also having them think about those success targets somewhere within our process that we use currently. So this is really helpful.
I think there's an added benefit if you're collecting the risks that you have seen, and that is also identifying systemic risks within the organization. Right. So if you see a common, and you can tie those back to maybe it's an org structure or something else, then that in itself can turn into a opportunity for improving the organization or the process. So now you're reducing. So every project team isn't trying to mitigate that particular, you're addressing it at its source, which also leads to the conversation of generating an RCA potentially when, if the risks are true and they can't be mitigated, or even if they can be mitigated, doing some root cause analysis to identify what's really driving this.
Yeah, a common one for us is process data not easily available.
Yeah.
We have that's just every single team. So it definitely is something as an organization that we need to address. We have tons of data. It's just intercepting it into the projects as needed and getting the right people at the table that have that information, or be willing to collect the data that we need if we don't currently have it. Just anecdotal data for that particular project. We just haven't come up with a good stable plan for that.
Yeah, and that kind of effort, if you're not factoring that into your timing, that could be a significant effort to collect data if it's never been collected before.
Absolutely, yeah. And people want to get to a solution right away, so they don't want to take that time.
Right.
I have a question in the chat. Can you speak a little about your process for determining risk likelihood as you develop a matrix?
This is one of the reasons this is a qualitative analysis is judging likelihood is subjective. So it's one or more people's gut feel about how likely that risk is to occur. So pooling the knowledge to get a consensus around how likely that something is to happen is best done as a group, I think, instead of one person. But that's another place where if you've got if you're keeping track of which of risks that have occurred before on other projects, then you've got some informed information about what other projects thought were likelihood. And then, of course, if it does happen, then it becomes an issue. But it is kind of a gut feel for, what you think could happen. And as you are monitoring the risk, then you can revisit the probability if it still hasn't happened and you thought it was a nearly, in the moderate to pretty likely range, and you could downgrade your probability if you've been monitoring it and nothing has changed. But all of this qualitative analysis of the probability and the impact is really figuring out where to focus your time, because most organizations can't come up with a risk response plan for everything. So you want to use that information, those judgment calls, to decide where you're going to put your focus.
Mm-hmm. Rachel, it sounded like she answered a lot of your question. Okay, so thanks for letting me know in chat. If there's anyone else, you can unmute your mic or type it into chat and we can relay it to Katie. I'm not seeing anything else in chat. Jane, did you have any parting words?
I just want to thank you, Katie. This was extremely useful. I really appreciate your time and taking all the questions.
Oh, you're very welcome. I really appreciated the opportunity to share the information, and I hope that people will find it helpful in thinking through process improvement efforts and kind of blending. A lot of people say that once you start doing process improvement, you see everything with process eyes. And I think that if you kind of put a risk management lens on things, then you're starting to look at, where could things go wrong? And what can we do about it?
Yeah, speaking of process improvement, we will be sending out a feedback survey along with the slides for the presentation and the recording. Please take a couple minutes to give us your thoughts. Any tips or topics you would like to see in the future would be very much appreciated. Thank you so much.
Yeah. And Katie, since you can't see all the chats, people are saying, thank you so much, Katie. Thank you. And thank you for getting up early. So
You're quite welcome.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and we will hopefully see you in the next coffee chat. Happy holidays.
Thank you so much.